Hello, pastors and ministry leaders. My name is Lou Reynolds, and I'm a vice president here at Start Church. In this video, I will share the 4 common myths surrounding ministers' housing allowance and give you the truths that correct them. The minister's housing allowance is arguably one of the most valuable benefits available to ministers, while also being one of the most confusing. It's necessary to understand what a housing allowance is not to better understand what a housing allowance is. Myth number 1, housing allowance is an additional income provided to the pastor. Common misconception among pastors, church administrators, and boards is that housing allowance is added income to the pastor's salary. This myth can lead to churches providing a separate check for the pastor to cover their housing. This confusion is understandable, and the term allowance seems to be the main source of that confusion. The easiest way to think about housing allowance is to think of it as housing exclusion. The portion of the salary that a minister uses to maintain their home is then excluded from the gross income and tax-free. The amount reported as taxable income is the calculated difference after excluding the housing allowance from the total salary. Myth number 2, housing allowance is retroactive. The truth about the minister's housing allowance is that it is not retroactive, it is only projected. What exactly does this mean? The housing allowance is applicable from the date it is approved through the end of the year. If the housing allowance is approved in June, any housing-related expenses before the approval date will not be able to be deducted for that year. Thus, it is imperative to approve the housing allowance in December for the following year or as early as possible to January. Myth number 3, housing allowance is exempt from all taxes. A minister's housing allowance is often mistakenly thought to be completely tax-free income. While this is true to some degree, it's not entirely free. The minister's housing allowance is a portion of a minister's income that is exempt from federal income tax. However, if a minister has not opted out of self-employment taxes, then the entirety of the minister's salary or income, including the portion designated as housing allowance, is subject to self-employment taxes. The last myth to dispel about housing allowance is that there is a limit to the amount that can be designated as a minister's housing allowance. The truth is, there's nothing stated in the tax code, Treasury regulations, or other IRS publication limiting the amount that a church can designate as a housing allowance for a minister. This means that up to 100% of your salary from the church can be designated as housing allowance once the proper calculations are made. Keep in mind that when choosing this route, the board of directors must indicate the actual amount of your total salary in the board meeting minutes approving your housing allowance. At Start Church, we make every effort to educate pastors and church leaders on the importance of understanding a minister's housing allowance to take full advantage of this tax benefit. However, there is still much misunderstanding among pastors when it comes to this topic. If you want to make sure that you are correctly setting up, calculating, and reporting your housing allowance, one of our specialists is standing by to take your call at 844-304-5824. It would be our honor to serve you.